Hello students, welcome to this lecture on composition normative. Composition is the pictorial arrangement of objects to form a harmonious and unified whole. Whenever a cameraman places a person or objects in the setting, he is primarily composing with a particular idea in mind. Placement of objects and persons is done to keep the audience interest in the shot. Since cinema is an affective medium, whatever the director does, like composition, lighting up, photography, or editing, he is doing it to mobilize the audience interest according to the script. The viewer's attention should be concentrated on the object or the player or the action that is unfolding in the frame. Composition should never be devoid of character. A well thought out composition can create an appropriate mood, an attitude, and a meaning by deploying the formal as well as the narrative material. Composition signifies the taste of a cameraman as well as imbues the scene with a certain aesthetic value. Motion picture composition draws its cardinal values from the principles of both painting and still photography. In that sense, painting and still photography is a precursor to motion picture composition. A still photographer freezes a particular moment in time. A still photographer, therefore, has mostly a spatial relationship with the material with which he is working. However, a motion picture cameraman deals with both space and time, and the temporal relationships are as important as the linear as well and the spatial relationships. During the duration of a shot, an object can move closer or recede away from the camera. The size of the object will change during the shot. The size of the object will change not just with regard to the camera, but also with regards to the other objects framed within the shot. This perpetual change in the shot has to be adjusted by the cameraman with requisite change in framing. This constantly changing image size complicates the issues of motion picture composition. A still photographer has to perfectly compose in order to arrive at an aesthetically pleasing photograph. Whereas a motion picture photographer, in spite of compositional faults, can still evince audience interest if he can manage to center the action within the frame adequately. As such, movement is an important component of motion picture composition which has to be used properly.
কোথায় যাচ্ছেন? ওই পদ্মার মাঝে জাগনার চরে যন্ত্র আনছেন নাকি? হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, এই যে নিচ্ছি। দেখি দেন দেন। একবার গুতাইয়া গেছি আবার আসি একবার গুতাইয়া গেছি আবার এসেছি হেইও রে হেইও বলো ভাই ফুটা নৌকায় ভাই খেলে না বাড়ি চলে যায় হেইও হেইও রে হেইও বলো ভাই ফুটা নৌকায় বাস খেলে না বাড়ি চলে যায় তাতে মটমট গুলের মুখ খিসালি অঙ্গে জ্বালা এর লাগুলো ধৈর্য পাক দেখুন লঙ্কাতে মাথা।
Before elaborating on the psychology of a composition, it is essential to understand the various compositional elements that go towards framing a subject. The basic compositional elements are line, form, mass, movement, and color. These basic elements are same in every part of the world, and they communicate similar feelings to every audience. In a sense, these compositional elements are universal in character. Properly employed, these compositional elements can evince the proper mood and aesthetic value in a composition. Lines. Lines are the contours of physical objects that we see all around us, as well as the abstract transitional lines which are formed by the movement of the eyeball. Lines are of several types. Lines are straight lines as well as curved lines. Straight lines could be vertical lines, horizontal lines, and diagonal lines. We see these lines in various forms all around us in nature. For example, the trunk of a tree is vertical. Usually, we associate a masculine power and character and strength with vertical lines. It is the vertical lines in an architectural structure which provides support to the building. The verticals come in the form of pillars. Next are the horizontal lines. A horizontal line is seen in the horizon where the ground meets the earth. It signifies expanse, tranquility, and stability. The position of a dead man lying on a cot is horizontal. Next are the dynamic lines. Dynamic lines bring about force and energy in a composition. The line, the graphic produced by a moving athlete is diagonal in nature. Last, we have the curved lines. The curved lines bring in a very delicate quality to the composition. The movement of a river is usually sinuous in character, which is like a curved line. It brings about a feminine quality to the composition. Now, these 4 or 5 different lines may not be seen through the contours of actually seen forms and shapes. These lines can also be seen as transitional lines, as abstracted lines, when the eyeball moves or scans a particular frame. When we observe the flight of birds, it shows a particular dynamic diagonal line. Similarly, the flight of an aeroplane, of a jet plane crossing through the sky represents a straight line which could be diagonal in nature. By using these lines, we can create various sort of mood in the frame. It is to be noted that neither the vertical line nor the horizontal line should be used parallelly to the main frame of the camera. Neither should a vertical or horizontal line used to divide up the frame into 2 equal parts. The next compositional element is the form. Forms are both man-made and natural. Physical forms are easy to recognize. However, transitional forms that are made by the movement of audience's eyeballs are not always easy to recognize. The movement of eyeballs from one object to another object and completed by moving to the first object can create several sorts of forms like triangular forms, circular forms, L-shaped forms, cross forms, and so on and so forth. Let us, for example, look at the formation of triangular forms. If three people are being composed in a frame, it could give rise to several situations. If one is sitting and two is standing, then it forms a triangle. But the triangle has its apex in the base, making the triangle unstable. However, if two people are sitting and one person standing, then the apex is at the top and the base is at the bottom, making the triangle more stable. Similarly, by a combination of characters, landscapes, buildings, and trees, one can arrive at several other forms of composition like a cross, an L-shaped composition, an oval composition. Such compositions, although are not always visible, but to a discerning eye, these compositions create an aesthetic value. The next compositional element is the mass. The mass is the pictorial weight of any object, shape, area, figure, or a group. A mass makes its presence felt inside a frame by separating itself by virtue of its pictorial weight as well as by its unity, by its cohesion, and by the use of color and light. The next compositional element is movement. In still photography or in painting, movement is merely suggested. But it is only in motion picture photography that movement gets its total flourish.
Komm zu mir, komm zu mir, komm zu mir, komm zu mir. Wir sprengten jeden Rahmen, als wir zusammenkamen, war es wie eine Explosion und ich schwöre, ich spüre die Erschütterung immer noch. Ich weiß, du rennst und doch bist du erst nah und da, wenn du in meinen Armen liegst. Ich geh zu Boden, wenn du nicht mit mir fliegst. Oh Baby, bitte, bitte, lauf, lauf, gib nicht auf, ich hab dich vermisst. Es fressen mich Dämonen auf, wenn du nicht bei mir bist. Ich tu, was du verlangst, hab keine Angst, ich lass dich nicht allein, denn uns gehört die Welt, wir können alles sein, doch jetzt bist du auf dich gestellt.
I wish I was a writer who sees what's yet unseen. I wish I was a prayer expressing what I mean. I wish I was a forest of trees that do not harm.
Movement can be of various types. Movement can be linear. A linear movement could be from left to right of frame or from the right to left of frame. A linear movement could also be from bottom to top of frame and vice versa, that is from top to bottom of a frame. Linear movement can also be diagonal in nature. Diagonal movement brings in the maximum amount of energy of all the various type of movements that we know of. Other than linear movement, there are circular movement, repetitive movements, and cascading movements. A circular movement or could be like that of a reptile, a snake moving on the ground. A repetitive movement can be that of a pendulum, which creates monotony. And a cascading movement could be that of a spring, which gets into action intermittently. Movements could be also towards and away from the camera. A movement that is directed towards the camera creates a lot of interest in the audience because the size of the object increases progressively as the object comes closer to the camera. The last compositional element is color. Color is the most culture specific of all the compositional elements that we have discussed so far. For example, if we talk about white, white has different connotation in different cultures. In a Hindu society, white can denote mourning. The family of a bereaved person wears white clothes, whereas the same white is used in gown of a Christian wedding, where white denotes purity. In an Islamic society again, mourning could be denoted by black. So we see that the same white color changes meaning as we move from one civilization to the other. The same goes about other colors like green, orange, yellow, and so on and so forth. In some countries, green represents youth, where in some other cultures, green represents fertility. However, filmmakers and artists have always found their own color aesthetics. Balance. Balance is an important factor that marks composition. Balance is a state of equilibrium. When all forces which are equal and compensate each other, they are said to be in balance. Pictorial balance wishes to achieve an overall harmony in the world of the narrative. Balance can also be seen as an inner state. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is reckoned as leaning because of our inner understanding of balance. Philosophically, also, we can say that balance is the zeroth state of energy of any system. Balance in composition could be of two types: symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance is achieved when two objects of similar value and similar weight are positioned in equilibrium in a frame. A two shot of a person is a typical example of symmetrical balance. If a boy and a girl are talking to each other across a table and both are framed equidistant from the center of the frame, then we have a symmetrical balance. The symmetry of these two characters is further achieved by an equal lighting and an equal camera angle. However, two characters are never exactly symmetrically balanced because it's always one character which is speaking while the other character who is listening to the first character speaking.
O muses, O high genius, O memory that hasn't inscribed what I saw, here will be shown thy nobleness. আবার কোট সেদিন না বললে এসব ডিস্ট্রাকশন
বলেছিলাম।
Asymmetrical balance is achieved when two different characters of different value are used to balance each other in a frame. The difference in value could be achieved by their positioning, by their lighting condition, as well as by the particular angle in which they meet the camera.
were expecting Miss Bursner?
Why, no. No, what an idea. Of course not.
You spoke her name just now.
When?
When I came in, you addressed me as Miss Bursner.
Well, that's her room, you know. What are you doing in there? Well, who are you? What are you doing in here?
Miss Bursner frequently comes through that door.
Frequently?
During the night.
No, never. That door is kept permanently locked. Mrs. Gruback keeps the key. Just ask her. Where is she? Does she know about you? Mrs. Gruback!
You were expecting Mrs. Gruback?
No, I'm not expecting anybody, least of all you, whoever the hell you are.
Where are you going?
Well, I think that Mrs. Gruback would like to know that there are strange people wandering around her apartment in the middle of the night.
You were starting in that direction, and that's Miss Bursner's room. Isn't that what you told me?
Yes, it is, and I'd very much like to know what's going on in there.
She isn't there now.
Well, that's not so very surprising. She gets in late sometimes, very late indeed. You are the police.
She gets in very late?
Look, don't go jumping to conclusions.
What conclusions?
Well, the hours they keep in the nightclub are no fault of Miss Bursner's. Look, she'll be home any minute now, and I'm sure she'll be able to answer your questions for herself. You are the police.
What makes you think we want to ask questions of her?
Oh, I have no opinion of it one way or another. It's nothing to do with me. I scarcely know Miss Bursner. Of course, we are fellow lodgers, but that's obvious. Is she in some kind of trouble?
What kind of trouble? Do you imagine we came here to see Miss Bursner?
Well, you certainly didn't come here to see me. Did you? Well, listen, you don't deny anything or affirm anything. You just stand there and stare at me in the middle of my private bedroom at 6:14 in the morning. I don't see why I should put up with it. You haven't even identified it yourself or show me your papers.
Isn't that for you to do?
Oh, no, my papers are in perfect order. Here, see for yourself.
Why don't you finish getting dressed?
For your information, I'm a man of regular habits, and getting dressed at 6:15 in the morning doesn't happen to be one of them. Still, I don't suppose there's any hope of getting any more sleep.
Where are you going?
I take a bath in the morning, if you must know. Why?
If you're reluctant to dress in front of me.
And I dress in the bathroom.
Oh?
Yes.
Perspective is an important compositional tool in the hands of a cinematographer. What is perspective? Perspective is the appearance of objects as determined by their relative position and relative distance with respect to other objects. Perspectives could be of two types: linear perspectives and aerial perspectives. A linear perspective is one in which parallel lines appear to converge at an infinite point. A typical example would be two railroads meeting at infinity. Similarly, the two vertical lines of a high-rise building appear to meet at a higher point when a viewer looks up. An aerial perspective occurs through the haze of atmosphere when the distant objects start looking soft in focus as well as lighter in hue. How does one enhance the sense of perspective? The sense of perspective is enhanced by putting smaller objects away from the camera and bigger objects closer to the camera. Secondly, it can also be increased by putting objects of lesser hue in the distance and more saturated colors in the foreground. The enhancement of perspective can also be achieved by placing objects not equidistant from the camera but one after the another so that the objects in the foreground overlap a certain portion of the objects that are behind in perspective. In conclusion, I would like to recapitulate that composition is the arrangement of pictorial objects in space. all such objects can be deconstructed into the compositional elements like lines, forms, masses, volumes, shapes, movement, and color. All these compositional elements have an emotional charge which is understood by the discernible eye of the audience. Used properly, such compositional elements can create the appropriate mood and meaning out of a composition. For all beginners, it is advisable that they have one single point of interest in the frame. This will serve two important purposes. One, the frame will remain clutter-free of several ideas which are overlapping, as also create a very easy communication with the audience. It is also noteworthy to mention that balance, both symmetrical as well as asymmetrical, and use of perspective is an important compositional device in the hand of the cinematographer.